Three women stood in the half-light of a barn that smelled of dry hay and rusted nails, and one of them said, steady but shaking, "You're going to have sex with us." It wasn't spoken like an invitation. It was spoken like a toll, the kind paid by people who had learned the wrong lessons from men with guns. Caleb Warren felt the words press against his ribs, heavy with fear, heavier with what they assumed he might be. Before we go any further, before this story tightens its grip, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Caleb had come west to buy land and disappear inside work. He wasn't chasing gold or running from the law. He was running from quiet memories that followed him like dust on a coat. And the town sold him the farm in one afternoon, too quick, too eager. The clerk slid the deed across the counter with a smile that never quite reached his eyes, and when Caleb asked why the price was so low, the man cleared his throat and said the place needed strong hands. No one else in the room met his gaze. The bell over the door rang as he left, and the sound followed him longer than it should have. The farm sat beyond the last row of houses, where the road thinned and the land opened into scrub and fence lines that leaned like tired men. The gate creaked when he pushed it open. He took in the place the way a trail hand takes in a camp, quietly, noting the small things, the smell of iron in the soil, the hitching post worn smooth, a barn door hung crooked but solid. The house itself was plain, paint flaking, windows clean. No smoke in the chimney, no dogs, no children's laughter, just the low hush of evening settling in. He dismounted slowly, boots stiff from the ride, revolver riding familiar at his hip. He wasn't jumpy, but he wasn't careless. He'd learned that difference the hard way. As he crossed the yard, he felt eyes on him, not the bold stare of rustlers or the nervous skitter of thieves, something steadier. When the women stepped forward, lantern light caught their faces one by one. May stood in front, shoulders squared, hair pulled back tight. Lillian leaned on the barn post, weight favoring one leg, jaw set like she expected trouble. Rose hovered behind them, lantern shaking in her hands, eyes too wide for her face. They didn't shout. They didn't run. May spoke like she'd practiced. Like she'd measured each word and found it wanting but said it anyway. The sentence fell between them, and Caleb felt his breath catch, not with desire, but with anger at the world that had taught them this was the price of safety. For a moment, no one moved. Caleb looked at the barn, the fences, the house. He looked at their hands, empty, roughened by work. He saw fear where he expected calculation. "That's not how land works," he said finally. His voice surprised even him. It came out low, steady. "And it's not how I work." Lillian laughed, sharp and short. "They all say something like that," she said. "Then they say something else." May didn't laugh. She watched him like a teacher watches a boy about to lie. "We don't have money," she said. "We don't have guns. This is what men take." Caleb thought of the men he'd ridden with, and the ones who thought a badge or a deed made them owners of more than dirt. He thought of nights by the fire when silence was safer than talk. "I bought a farm," he said. "I didn't buy people." The quiet stretched. A coyote called far off, the sound thin and lonely. Rose's lantern guttered, and Caleb reached out without thinking, steadying it. She flinched, then stilled. Her hands were cold. They told him to leave. He said he'd sleep in the loft and ride into town at first light to settle things proper. Lillian scoffed. May nodded once, as if conceding a point she'd hoped not to. He climbed the ladder with his blanket and lay staring at the beams, listening to the house breathe. He slept light, dreams breaking on the sound of a cough from below. Deep, wet, stubborn. May's cough. Morning came pale and dry. Caleb came down with his boots in hand and found the women at the table. Coffee sat thin in a pot, the smell honest and plain. May poured him a cup without looking at him. Lillian fixed a broken chair leg with wire. Rose sliced bread, careful, precise. They spoke in pieces, like people used to being interrupted. The farm had been their brother's. Fever took him one winter, quick and merciless. The debt came after. Men came with papers, then with threats. One didn't leave. They buried him near the cottonwood, far enough from the house that the ground could forget. May had taught school before the sickness. Lillian learned to mend from their father, who died on a trail north of nowhere. Rose learned to read at night, letters traced with a finger in the air when candles ran low. Caleb listened. He didn't touch his gun. And he didn't interrupt. When the coffee was gone, he stood and set his revolver on the table, sliding it away from himself. The metal made a soft sound against wood. "I'm staying," he said. "If that's all right, not like you think. I'll earn my keep, same as anyone." Lillian stared at the gun, then at him. "Why?" He thought of the nights he'd spent moving, the way stillness scared him. "Because I'm tired of being what people expect," he said, "and because you look like you need fences fixed." They worked that day. The sun climbed and the dust lifted. Caleb found his hands remembered the language of wood and wire. He replaced posts, tightened rails, mended what had been left to sag. The women watched at first, then joined him. Rose fetched nails and learned the feel of a hammer. Lillian showed him a trick with wire that held better than new. May rested more than she wanted to, and when she stood too fast, Caleb noticed the way the world tilted for her before it righted. The town noticed him too. Whispers followed him when he rode in for supplies. A man with a face wrapped in a scarf asked questions with his eyes and his hands too close to his holster. Caleb paid and left without answering. He didn't like the way the man watched the road. That night, the rider came. He didn't knock. He stepped into the yard like he belonged there. Caleb was on the porch before he knew it, body moving on old instincts. The words were few, the shot was fast. When it was over, the man lay still, the dust settling around him like a blanket. Caleb's hands shook once, then steadied. He'd hoped to leave that part of himself behind, and the West had other plans. May sat on the porch steps afterward, breath shallow, eyes fixed on nothing. 6 months, she said quietly. That's what the doctor told me before he rode on. She didn't look at her sisters when she spoke. Maybe less. The weight of it settled over the farm, heavy and exact. Caleb understood then what they'd been paying for all along. Not safety from men like him, but time. Time to keep the land, time to keep each other. He nodded once. "We'll make it hold," he said. And for the first time since he'd crossed the gate, May let herself believe him. The days that followed did not announce themselves as important. They arrived plain and quiet, like most turning points do, carrying weight only after they had passed. Caleb stayed because leaving felt like another kind of theft. He took the small room off the kitchen, the one with a window that stuck and a floorboard that sighed when stepped on. At night, the house made its old sounds, wood settling, wind brushing the eaves, May's cough cutting through the dark at hours that never felt kind. Caleb lay awake listening, measuring the space between breaths, learning the shape of a place that was beginning to accept him. Morning brought work that needed doing whether hearts were ready or not. Fence posts leaned and fields waited. Lillian rose before anyone else, her limp worse in the cold, pride making her move faster than pain allowed. She spoke little, but when she did, her words landed exact. Rose followed her like a shadow at first, then like a partner, questions growing braver as days passed. May moved slower than she wanted to, stubborn about rest. Correcting their mistakes from a chair by the door, eyes sharp even when her body failed her. Caleb watched her carefully. He'd seen sickness before. He knew how it stole in inches, not miles. They learned each other through small habits. Lillian fixed things silently, wire and patience her tools. Rose hummed when she was nervous, a tune that changed with her mood. May counted everything: steps, cups of water, boards cut, like order itself might keep her standing. Caleb brought in water, split wood, and spoke only when words mattered. At supper they sat close but careful. 4 people circling a truth none of them wanted to say out loud. That staying was becoming a choice, not an accident. The town tested him. Men watched too long. Women whispered behind hands. A preacher rode out one afternoon and asked if everything was proper. Caleb told him yes. The preacher didn't look convinced, but he rode away. Later that week, a storekeeper warned Caleb that men would come asking questions. "Land like that," he said, "doesn't sit quiet." Caleb thanked him and bought extra nails. One evening, as the sky cooled and the day loosened its grip, Caleb found Rose sitting on the fence, book open in her lap, not reading. "What's it about?" he asked, nodding at the pages. She jumped, then laughed at herself. "Doesn't matter," she said. "I've read it twice." She hesitated. "Do you ever wish you could stop moving?" He thought of the road stretching behind him, of the way memory kept pace no matter how fast he rode. "Sometimes," he said, "but standing still takes practice." The rider came back that night. The same man from town, face wrapped, questions carried in his hands. He called out once, mocking. Lillian reached for a tool. Rose froze. May stood too fast and swayed. Caleb stepped forward, calm settling in him like a second spine. Words were exchanged, quick and thin. The man drew. Caleb answered. The sound cracked the air and was gone. When it was over, dust settled and silence took its place. No one cheered, no one cried. They stood together, breathing, knowing what had just been added to their story and what could never be taken away. After, May spoke the truth she'd been carrying like a stone. She told them about the doctor, the months measured and counted. Lillian turned away, anger rising where grief wanted to be. Rose pressed her hands to her mouth. Eyes bright with tears she refused to spill. Caleb felt the promise form in him before he spoke it. "We'll keep the farm," he said, "and we'll keep each other, however long." Time shifted then, marked by small victories and quiet losses. Caleb sold a horse he loved to pay down debt. Lillian's repairs held through storms. Rose learned to argue without apology. May rested more, taught from her chair, passing along lessons she wanted to outlive her. Some nights, fear came heavy. Other nights, hope showed up unannounced, slipping in through shared laughter over burnt bread or a story told badly on purpose. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a bank 2 towns over. The debt was larger than they'd been told. The land could still be taken. Lillian wanted to ride out and settle it with words she'd been saving. Caleb stopped her with a look. "Me, we'll do it right," he said. "No more graves." They worked harder. They sold produce. They mended neighbors' fences for pay. Caleb took day jobs hauling freight, coming home bone-tired but steady. Rose began keeping accounts, numbers lining up under her careful hand. May watched, proud and afraid in equal measure. "You're good at this," she told Rose one night. "Better than I ever was." Rose shook her head, but she smiled. The house changed as fear loosened its grip. Lillian laughed once, surprising herself. Rose brought flowers in from the field and set them on the table without explanation. Caleb found himself lingering at the door at night, listening to their voices, feeling the weight of belonging settle where loneliness had lived too long. He kept his distance, careful not to confuse gratitude with want, safety with permission. This winter edged closer. May's strength waned. Some mornings she could not rise. Other days she insisted on walking the fence line, leaning on Caleb's arm, counting steps like prayers. "Promise me," she said once, stopping by the cottonwood. "Promise me this place won't eat them when I'm gone." Caleb met her gaze. He didn't look away. "I promise." The debt letter was answered. The bank agreed to terms that cut deep, but left hope intact. It would take time. Time May might not have. The truth of that sat heavy at the table the night they received the reply. No one spoke for a long while. Then May reached across and took Caleb's hand. Her grip was firm. "Thank you," she said, not for the work, not for the money, for the staying. That night, Caleb dreamed of roads that ended at a gate that didn't creak when opened. He woke before dawn, heart steady. Outside, the farm held under the weight of stars, quiet and waiting. The choice he'd made was no longer a question. It was a path, and he was already walking it. The end did not come with drama. It arrived the way truth often does, soft, final, and impossible to bargain with. May passed on a cold morning when the air felt thin and exact. She had asked for the window to be opened just enough to smell the fields. Caleb stood on one side of the bed, Rose on the other, Lillian at her feet, pretending strength would change the outcome. May's breathing slowed, counted like the lessons she'd taught, and then it stopped. For a long moment, no one moved. The house seemed to lean inward, listening, as if it might undo what had just happened. It did not. They buried her beneath the cottonwood, the ground hard and honest. Lillian drove the shovel until her arms shook. Rose placed a small book in the grave, pages folded back where May had left off. Caleb stood with his hat in his hands, promise heavy and present. No preacher came. They spoke their own words, simple and true. When it was done, the farm felt quieter, not emptier. Changed, the way things are after something important has been said. Time moved differently after that. 6 months passed, marked by work and the slow turning of grief into memory. Lillian took on more, her limp worsening but her resolve unbroken. She learned to rest when she had to, learned that stopping did not mean failing. Rose stepped into the space May left with a careful confidence, keeping the books, making decisions, asking for help when pride threatened to get in the way. Caleb stayed steady, yet not filling May's place but guarding it, honoring the shape she'd left behind. Winter broke late. When the ground softened, they planted again. Caleb sold the last of his gear from the road, tools that no longer fit the life he was building. The debt shrank, not fast, but enough to breathe. Neighbors began to wave. The town's whispers dulled. People noticed when a place held. The change between Caleb and Rose did not announce itself. It arrived in small moments, a hand steadying another on a ladder, a shared look when numbers finally balanced, laughter that came easier and stayed longer. Caleb kept his distance until Rose closed it herself, standing beside him at the fence one evening, shoulder-brushing his. "You don't have to stay because you promised," she said, eyes on the horizon. "You can stay because you want to." He considered the weight of that. "I do," he said. The words were simple. They were enough. They married under a sky the color of worn steel. No crowd, no spectacle. Lillian stood with them, expression fierce and proud. Vows were spoken plain, promises measured and kept. The farm watched, fences straightened, fields patient. Life continued as it does, carrying both loss and hope in the same hands. Years later, the cottonwood grew broader, its shade generous. Children learned to run along the fence line, counting steps the way May once had. The grave stayed undisturbed. The land held. If this story stirred something in you, ask yourself, what would you have done if fear had asked that price of you? Would you have taken or would you have stayed? And how many chances for redemption pass us by because we don't believe they're real? Thanks for staying to the end. Where are you watching from?